But if you have incompetent regulators, if regulators have the incentive to kick things down the road and not give decisions, give balloon decisions, delay, obfuscate, I think we've got a problem. So my point in all my interventions in this is we don't need to do this workaround and limit ourselves to the workaround. What we have to do is to improve things for the whole country. This is a temporary patch. And if we have regulators that give substantive decisions within a decent time frame, after looking at all the facts, then concurrence, giving a decision, all these things will be fine. When a BOI company wants water, they go to the BOI. They go to the BOI. When they want immigration clearance, getting a work permit for somebody, they go to the BOI. Only thing I think they can do without going to the BOI today, 40 years later, 43 years later, is perhaps get a telephone connection. Now that's one sector, thanks to people like Samarajiva and so on, that was fixed. The telecom sector was fixed, liberalized, reformed. But we haven't fixed water, we haven't fixed electricity, we haven't fixed the corrupt immigration system, work permit system, and we still need workarounds. So if a company is a BOI registered company, they might be able to get a work permit. If they're not, good luck to them. So no, I'm not very happy. My preference would have been that this particular workaround should have had some time-bound targets, which said, the external sector will be improved, and then we'll remove the workaround.
The taxation power, the regulatory power, they were interested only the regulatory power to be in respect of whatever concessions or whatever within that port city area, to be within so-called port city commission to regulate. So, for example, it didn't want to have it only wanted the commission be able to give the concessions, but the enforcement of those or violation of prosecution all need to be still there. And those they wanted the other regulatory authority to be there. And I think that's what they were on the spirit of trying to do that, because there were several provisions which said that, the sole authority for regulation would fall into the commission's hands. And that was a bit of a question, but because the entire commission itself is not a commission, it's a corporate body, which is in fact a private corporate body, which is funded by the so-called project company. And that is another concern for us, that we made submissions in the court saying that this is in fact a corporate body which is capitalized by a Chinese state-owned entity. And another aspect we pointed out is that this funding is in fact protected by the China-Sri Lanka Investment Treaty, because it is investment in terms of the treaty. And we did not know the terms of that funding, whether that could be converted. We made a question whether that has any equitable, can be that so-called loan can be convertible debenture, convertible debenture. That was made submission, but the Supreme Court unfortunately did not make a reference to the submissions. But that is a question that is a very insidious question, I think.
The type of investors that we should be wanting to come in, it would be having good structures in place generally, and the financial regulatory system and the regulatory environment in general. Now, the Act as it stands is very vague on all of those, and there is lots of areas where this commission will have to come up with its regulations. So, whether it's going to incentivize the correct type of investors to come in is a big question mark. And on the other hand, if you're talking about the fact that ease of doing business in Sri Lanka is hard because we don't have good regulatory structures in place generally, and that's why you need this one-stop shop type of thing. We should ask also the question whether we need to clean up our regulatory authorities in general so that the ease of doing business in general is better for everybody.
If you look around the world, they are as reasonable as they can get. And honestly, if you ask me, I have a very radical view on taxes. Corporates must pay taxes. When you look at our tax to GDP ratio in Sri Lanka, it's extremely low, which shows that our corporations are not paying the taxes or they have got exemptions. We need to have much higher income from taxation than we have at the moment in the country, for it is a significant source of revenue, which then goes into development. So all businesses must be prepared to pay 20, 30%, 20, 25% tax. And I think most business forecasters take that into account. We should not push the government towards subsidizing growth. Growth should come, as we say, from good infrastructure, stability, good governance. Those are the things that they should be investing in. A prospering business does not mind paying taxes or should not mind paying taxes. Therefore, one feels that we should not unnecessarily burden the government by asking for various SOPs. A good business cannot survive on SOPs. It has to survive on its own and compete on its own. So we need to make sure that we have a regime where we are setting up people to succeed. That is more important to consider than to just give tax exemptions, in my view.
For us in the export business, we would just like, a clear policy for the next 5-10 years that's consistent, that allows us to plan our investments in Sri Lanka, around the country. With the current situation, there's a tremendous opportunity of a growth in our industry. With many countries facing certain situations. There's a situation with Chinese cotton and Chinese yarn that's bringing in a lot of potential into Sri Lanka, and we as entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka need a 5-10 year clear policy horizon to allow us to bring that business into Sri Lanka. We're tremendously thankful for the EDB and the BOI and all the authorities in helping us through these difficult times. And now we have to think, hopefully by the end of this year, that we're out of this situation. And now the next 5-10 years, how can we grab, the investment and business that's headed to other countries and bring it back to Sri Lanka, so we can all help the economy together.
Well, I don't think it's a trap that the Chinese set for us, but I do think that in the manner in which it is currently configured, and given the timing, that we are falling into a trap of our own making. I've seen this happen before. We had much better economic prospects in 1977-78 when President Jayathillake, or rather Mr. Jayathillake, took over and then became the president in 1978. We had an 8% growth rate initially, but within years, by the time the second term came around, this place had become a hellhole, as it were. The point I want to drive home is that however good your economic prospects or your intentions or your plans, unless you get three things right, three fundamentals right, the economy will go into a downswing, a downward spiral, and crash. It happened to us. We got off to a very good start in 77, 78, and the three mistakes. One was the economic model. There was growth, but not enough equity. I think Ganeshan's father was one of those who pointed that out at that time. The second is the mismanagement of ethnic relations. And the third, which is most pertinent to us today, is the gross and grotesque mismanagement of our international relations.
Could really be a kind of a game changer at one level. It could potentially be a sort of a pathway for Sri Lanka to be a kind of a Dubai in South Asia. Now, remember, Dubai's per capita income is some 40,000 US dollars, and Sri Lanka, is struggling at some under 4,000 US dollars per head. So that is what the port city could be. And the game changer is in services sector development, taking Sri Lanka to modern services. Some numbers I think are quite interesting based on some cases we've been working on. So if you do some simulation, for instance, the kind of foreign investment that could come under certain conditions, under a low case scenario, it could add some 11% to Sri Lanka's FDI stock. Under a high scenario, you could add some 35%. And what that could mean is an economy, 3% larger than it is today in terms of GDP under a low case scenario, or something as much as 10% larger than what it is, because FDI is a particularly transformative process. Now, all of this is not going to happen overnight. I mean, as Dayan kind of hinted at, there are many issues that we are facing in the port city coming on stream and being a game changer for Sri Lanka in the future. And there are two kinds of broad conditions. One is what kind of regulatory kind of legal framework do we want for it? And the second really concerns what kind of national policies do we want for the country to make it attractive as a destination for investment.
So my view is that obviously if you are going to give an incentive like a very generous tax exemption, that is certainly going to be attractive, but that is not the most important criteria that is going to determine whether an investor is going to come and invest in the port city. After this, I answer this, Iruni, maybe I can answer whether Sri Lanka should be giving these incentives. But from an investor perspective, the most important thing is whether they can make a return on the investment. So the first criteria that they're going to ask is, what is the business opportunity? Which is the market that I'm serving? Am I serving an onshore market or an offshore market? What are the kind of competencies and capabilities that are available within the country or that will be brought in to a business that is located into the port city? So can I bring in global talent and global resources that it will allow ingress and egress very easily, so that this is a more superior location than any other location that you're going to base your business. So today in a service oriented business, it really doesn't matter where you are physically located. So it has to be a hub where, people want to live and work, and they're going to be highly productive because they are next to classic agglomeration effect, that you're next to many other types of businesses or some other types of professionals where you can engage in developing complex products. So there's a lot of other criteria that will be more important than tax incentives.
I don't think port city is a panacea for all ills we have. As I said, for our country to be in the position where we are, symptoms are quite evident for some time. And obviously successive governments have failed to articulate a consistent business-friendly policy environment, taking the advantage of the location, the talent. There are positives that we can tick the box. So I don't think this is that, right? I think most definitely the port city development will support what is required or kickstart, especially in a challenging environment like post-COVID, where last year alone foreign direct investments globally declined by over 40%. So it will really kickstart. It will be an impetus really for FDIs and promoting export of services. But definitely don't think that this is going to cure or take us out of a lot of troubles that we are in at the moment. Yes, so actually this bill, the piece of legislation, has been in the making since 2017 under the previous regime, in fact. It went through many rounds of drafts. Whilst the Chinese actually reclaimed 2.7 square kilometer city and ready for investment, I'm glad that hopefully the bill will get enacted today with delays. Right, so from a timing perspective, we completed reclamation in 2019, Jan. Ideally, we would have been in a position to go out there and market Port City. Better late than never. Obviously, it's a progressive piece of legislation, in my opinion, and I think it is because this piece of legislation has to act as a marketing tool for us to be able to talk to serious anchor tenants, talk to serious developers, investors to relocate or expand their business to Sri Lanka. And I think the bill is quite progressive. I think we can really go and have those discussions with potential parties. Whereas before, when we were doing what we call some soft market testing, right? The response from the region globally to invest or set up their business in Sri Lanka was not so good. If you set aside the constitutionality of it, but purely from a commercial perspective, if you ask me, having now, after the amendments, according to the law, Commission can enforce these regulations. However, when they are developing these regulations, they need to get the approval by the existing regulator. So this means that there will be almost 2 regulators, which means the Commission has to get the concurrence or the decision of the existing regulator. So that can, in my opinion, can cause issues when you operationalizing it, right? So if you ask me purely from a commercial perspective, you have just one apex body, that would have been ideal, but I understand we are in a democracy, and then if it is not in line with the constitution, we need to make those amendments. So the thinking here is we hope that the Commission will really still can play that single window investment facilitator role and deal expeditiously with the existing regulators and liaise with the potential investors, businesses who want to set up in Colombo Port City.
Well, yes. I mean, as a consequence of the 20th Amendment, we don't have a proper constitutional council. We only have some sort of parliamentary council, which is obliged to give its observations, and those observations need not be acted upon. Sure. So within the current constitutional framework, which is reasserted and reaffirmed the primacy, not just primacy, the overarching predominance of the executive presidency, yes, he does have power, but one must say, though, that the bill does specify that whoever he appoints to the commission needs to have certain amount of expertise and specialized knowledge. And we now have the government saying that they will give to Sri Lankans the majority of the seats on that commission, and the chairperson too would be a Sri Lankan. But the current constitutional framework that we have after the 20th Amendment is indeed extremely disappointing in that respect. I mean, the whole point about a functioning liberal democracy is that the 3 branches of government, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, that no single one of them will be so powerful as to lay down the law to the others. But of course, this question was not the one before the court at this point. This question was something that had to be dealt with as far as the 20th Amendment was concerned. Yeah. So given the current constitutional framework, I think perhaps the court has done the best that it could, although there are arguments, and I have a certain sympathy for these arguments, that it could have struck out more boldly and talked about the importance of the separation of powers.
First of all, if we take a step back and look at this entire project, I don't think anybody who has a sense of the value of investments would have a problem with the concept of the project, because this is generally a project that has gone through governments. So the sticking point, I think, was this the latest bill, and if it helps, that the government decided to make the amendments and not go for a 2/3 majority and then expedite the process, I think that may be good in the interest of time, because as we know, there was a delay with the previous government where they had certain issues with it. Some may say legitimate, and some may say that it delayed the process, but there was a delay. So I think it's important that this project gets going.
So in this point, I think what we should try to do is, to make it as successful as possible, this project, and whether it will be a catalyst for the country's economy or a source of tax income leakage or hotbed for money laundering or paradise for both local and global robber barons, it is, only time will tell us. So I think, as Charindra said, what we need to do is, to focus on this, the media, everybody else, and to make this right. I think opposition will also have a bigger role to play in this.